I was halfway through pouring my first cup of morning coffee when the phone on the kitchen counter started ringing. Not buzzing, not chiming, but ringing, that old landline sound that hardly exists anymore. I almost didn't answer. It was 2:07 a.m. The kind of hour when you already know that if the phone rings, something's wrong. But then I saw the area code. 757 Norfolk, Virginia. The same number that used to flash on the caller ID whenever my father called from base. My hand trembled. It couldn't be. He'd been gone 20 years. I picked up. Hello. For a few seconds there was only static, that low hum like the sound of a seashell pressed to your ear. Then a man's voice broke through. Rough, uncertain, but achingly familiar. "Little Star, it's me." The mug slipped from my hand and shattered on the tile floor. I couldn't breathe. My knees hit the cabinet behind me. "Who is this?" I managed to say, but the line went dead. Silence. I stared at the receiver like it was a loaded gun. My father, Commander Robert Henderson, U.S. Navy SEAL, had been declared killed in action off the coast of Norfolk in 2005. I'd stood beside the flag-draped coffin myself. I'd folded the flag with my own hands. I'd placed the white rose on top before the Marines carried it away. So who the hell had just called me? By 2:30 I was sitting at the kitchen table wrapped in my robe, the house still dark except for the soft yellow light from the stove hood. The old voicemail light blinked red. One new message. I pressed play. Static again, then the same voice. "Little Star, it's me. I just figured out who I am." Then nothing. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might faint. I replayed it over and over, memorizing every crack in that voice, every breath. If it was a cruel prank, someone had done their research. The tone, the rhythm, even the slight rasp he'd had from too many cigars in the 90s, it was all there. I whispered Dad like a fool talking to ghosts. When dawn finally came, I drove to the cliff overlook just past Kennebunkport, the one he used to love when he was stationed here. The fog was still thick, rolling in off the Atlantic. He used to tell me the ocean keeps secrets better than people ever could. For 20 years I believed one of those secrets was my father's death. He'd been on a classified maritime test near Norfolk. Explosion fire, total loss of communication. 5 presumed dead, no bodies recovered. The Navy held a quiet ceremony. The CO handed me a folded flag, his dog tags, and a letter of honor. I'd accepted that as the truth, or at least I'd trained myself to, until now. At 9 sharp, I was outside the Bath Veterans Office, still in my coat, hair uncombed, demanding answers. The young man at the desk, barely 25, looked at me with that polite, bureaucratic patience that comes from seeing too many broken people before noon. "Ma'am, the records for 2005 SEAL operations are sealed under the Defense Secrecy Act. I'm his daughter," I said. He's calling me." That got a look. Not pity, concern. He printed a form and slid it across the counter. "If you believe you've been contacted by an active or missing service member, fill this out. We'll forward it to Norfolk Command." I wanted to scream. Instead, I took the form, filled out every blank, and walked out into the wind. That night, I called Cole Martinez, one of Dad's old teammates. Cole had retired years ago, ran a security company out of Tampa. His voice was slower now, deeper, but still carried that military steadiness. "Claire," he said, surprise thick in his tone. "Haven't heard your voice in forever. How's Maine treating you, Cole?" "I got a phone call. Yeah, from my father." There was silence on the line, then a sharp exhale. "Come again," he said. "Little Star, it's me." I could hear him shift, probably sitting up. "Claire, you sure it wasn't a wrong number, a prank? Not unless someone studied his voice for 20 years. Cole didn't laugh, didn't even breathe for a few seconds. "You might want to check something for me," he said quietly. "You still got his personnel file?" "Yes. Look at the mission report from 2005 Operation Iron Wave. I've seen it. Look closer at the sign-off, the commanding officer's name. It says, Captain D. Reynolds. Yeah, Reynolds was private contractor security, hired help, not Navy. The op got pulled into black budget after the explosion." "What are you saying?" I asked. "I'm saying your dad might have gotten caught in something off-book, something they didn't want on record." I closed my eyes. He's alive, I don't know. But if that voice came from 757, maybe he's closer than you think. That night, lying awake, I pulled out the old cedar box that held everything I'd saved his medals. His letters, the pocket knife he'd carried on every mission since Panama. I opened one of the letters dated August 2004, written in his blocky, precise handwriting. If anything ever happens to me, little star, promise me one thing. Don't stop asking questions. Truth has a funny way of hiding in plain sight. I'd always thought that was just a father's philosophy. Now it felt like a map. I didn't sleep at all. At sunrise, I opened my laptop, typed Norfolk Unlisted Hospital 2005 survivors, then Missing Veterans Amnesia Cases, Virginia, then SEAL Classified Explosion Survivors. And that's when I saw at a local blog post from just 3 months ago, unidentified veteran found near Jacksonville shipyard, suffering memory loss, claims he used to be somebody important. The man's build, the approximate age, the same region code. It was a lead, or maybe another heartbreak waiting to happen, but either way I knew what I had to do. I packed a bag, threw it in the trunk, and started driving south. By the time I hit the New Hampshire border, the sun was rising, and I'd already replayed that voicemail 20 times. Each time my father's voice seemed both clearer and less real, like a song you half remember from childhood. I kept the radio off. I didn't want to drown it out. It had been 20 years since I'd driven this far south. The last time I was 25, wearing a black dress, gripping a folded flag against my chest, while the rain soaked through my shoes. Now I was 45, divorced, living alone and chasing a ghost down I-95. Every time I passed a convoy or saw the faded blue of a VA license plate, something inside me tightened. Dad had always said, "The road is honest, Claire. It gives you time to decide whether you're running towards something or away from it." Right then, I wasn't sure which one I was doing. I reached Norfolk just after sunset. The city hadn't changed much, same brick warehouses, same gulls circling above the harbor cranes. I booked a cheap motel near the naval yard, the kind with flickering signs and a smell of fried shrimp and old cigarettes. When I opened my suitcase, I realized I'd forgotten half my clothes. I hadn't been planning to stay, but deep down I knew I wasn't leaving soon. The next morning I drove to the Norfolk VA regional office. I'd been there once before, years ago, when I requested my father's personal effects. This time I was ready to demand more than sympathy. A middle-aged clerk named Donna, hair gray but sharp eyes behind her glasses, took my ID and sighed. "Commander Henderson." "Deceased, 2005, she murmured, scrolling through the database. "I know what it says," I replied. "But he called me." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "You mean someone pretending to be him?" "I mean my father. I have the voicemail." She hesitated, studying my face the way nurses look at patients on the edge. Then she said quietly, "Sometimes we get these cases. Families hearing from lost soldiers. Usually it's scam artists, sometimes folks with PTSD. But..." She trailed off. "But what? But 20 years is a long time. A lot of records got sealed after the contractor scandals." She leaned closer. "If you're serious, there's one person who might help. Retired now, used to be at Defense Investigations, name's Colonel Michael Reeves. He won't be in any directory, but he lives out near Chesapeake Bay. He was assigned to Iron Wave after the explosion." I thanked her, wrote down the name, and stepped outside. The air smelled of salt and diesel. That evening I found Reeves's address, a small house near the marshes, American flag still flying on the porch. He answered the door himself, tall and thin, wearing an old navy sweatshirt. "Colonel Reeves. That's what they used to call me. You must be Claire Henderson." The way he said it, not, "Who are you?" but, "You must be," made me shiver. He led me inside, poured coffee, and sat across the table. "I knew your father," he said simply. "Robert was one of the best." I swallowed hard. "Then maybe you can tell me why he called me last week." He didn't flinch. He just stared into his cup. "You sure it was his voice?" "Yes. And you're sure you buried him?" I folded his flag myself. He nodded slowly, then leaned back. "You're not crazy. I'll tell you what I can. Operation Ironwave wasn't a standard SEAL op. It was subcontracted under a private defense group testing experimental underwater communications. Your father was team lead. After the explosion, 5 presumed dead, 2 bodies recovered, neither confirmed as Robert Henderson. The report you saw was rewritten to close the case." I gripped the table. "Why? Because there were no survivors to dispute it. or so we thought. He looked up, then eyes weary. 2 years later, I got a tip from a Navy contractor in Jacksonville. He said a man had been found unconscious near the docks wearing pieces of a SEAL wetsuit with the initials RH stitched inside the collar. When I tried to follow up, the body disappeared from the records. Hospital said he was transferred to a private facility. That's where the trail ended. My throat tightened, and no one told us orders from above. Operational containment, they called it. I retired not long after. I sat there, heart pounding. The sound of gulls outside seemed deafening. So he could have been alive this whole time. Reeves sighed. If he was someone didn't want him found. Back at the motel, I sat on the edge of the bed staring at my father's photo, the one from his retirement ceremony in Doe 4, him standing straight-backed, smiling sun glinting off his silver hair. 20 years later, that smile haunted me. I called Cole again. Reeves confirmed some of it, I said. He thinks Dad survived. Cole's voice dropped low. Then, be careful, Claire. If he's alive, that means someone's been hiding him. Those people don't like being found out. I'm not backing off now. I didn't think you would, he said with a hint of pride. But promise me one thing, if you find him, don't go alone. I promised, though I knew I'd break it. 2 days later, I followed Reeves's lead to Jacksonville. The drive was long, straight, endless pines and empty gas stations. Somewhere in North Carolina, I stopped at a diner just off the highway. The waitress, maybe 60, poured coffee into a chipped mug and said, "You look like you've seen a ghost, honey." I smiled weakly, something like that. "Well," she said, nodding at my cross necklace, "if the dead start calling, best thing you can do is listen close. They usually got something left to say." Her words stuck with me the whole drive. I reached Jacksonville by dusk, the sky bruised purple over the harbor. Seagulls screamed overhead and the air smelled like metal and salt. I pulled into a small veterans shelter, the same one from the blog post, a 2-story brick building with peeling paint, and a hand-lettered sign, "Harbor House for those who served." Inside, the manager, an older black woman named Miss Lorraine, greeted me kindly. "Looking for someone, baby?" "Yes," I said, my voice trembling. "A man who might have stayed here. Maybe used the name Robert. Or Bob." Her eyes softened. "Oh, him. Quiet fella. Lived here on and off for years. Always polite, always called everyone sir or ma'am. Haven't seen him for about a week, though." My breath caught. A week. She nodded. Left after a phone call in the middle of the night. Said he had someone to find. The room tilted. I gripped the counter to steady myself. "Did he say where he was going?" I asked. "No, sweetheart," she said gently, "but he looked hopeful." Hope. That was something I hadn't felt in 20 years. I spent that first night in Jacksonville staring at the motel ceiling, the hum of the old air conditioner mixing with the sound of waves hitting the harbor wall. Sleep wasn't an option. I kept seeing his face in flashes, not the strong, clean-shaven seal from my childhood photos, but the man Miss Lorraine described, quiet, polite, older, worn. At dawn, I drove back to Harbor House with 2 coffees and a box of donuts, hoping she might remember more. The sun was barely up, and the sky had that soft pink tint that makes even broken streets look gentle. Miss Lorraine was unlocking the door when I arrived. "Well, morning sugar," she said, smiling tiredly. "Couldn't sleep either, huh?" "Not really," I admitted. "Did he ever mention family, a daughter, maybe?" She frowned, thinking. "Once, maybe twice. He said her name started with a C. She was my little star," he said. "I remember because it was sweet." Said he used to tell her stories about the sea. I had to bite my lip to keep from crying. "That's what he called me," I whispered. She touched my arm gently. "Then, honey, I think you're close." He used to sit out back by the dock every night, staring at the water like he was waiting for something. You might try asking at the VA clinic on Bay Street. He'd go there when he wasn't feeling right. The clinic was small, tucked between a pawn shop and a shuttered diner. A tired nurse at the front desk glanced up as I entered. "I'm looking for a man," I said, showing her a faded photo of my father. He might have come here over the years. "Name's Robert Henderson." She squinted. "That face looks familiar. You said he was Navy, yes." She turned toward a filing cabinet, flipping through folders. We had a veteran matching that description. Checked in off and on since 2010, used the name R. Hanley. Chronic migraines, memory issues, disorientation, head trauma. Where is he now? Discharged 2 weeks ago. Said he was heading north. My pulse spiked. North, she nodded. Said he wanted to see the ocean again before winter. Driving back toward the coast, I found myself replaying the sound of his voice in the voicemail, "Little Star." It's me. When I was 6, he'd whisper that every night before turning out the light. He'd tap the glow-in-the-dark stars on my ceiling and say, "You don't have to be afraid of the dark, kiddo. It's just the sky with the lights turned off." The last time I heard him say it in person was the day he shipped out for his final mission. I'd hugged him at the base gate, too proud to cry. He'd smiled and said, "You keep shining, little star." Always. Now 20 years later, he was somewhere out there alive, broken, but calling my name again. By mid-afternoon, I reached the pier Miss Lorraine had mentioned. The docks were quiet except for a few fishermen and the sound of seagulls. I sat on the same weathered bench he might have sat on. The water shimmered like glass sunlight bouncing off the ripples. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through old photos of us, Dad teaching me to tie a sailor's knot, Dad holding my bike while I wobbled down the driveway. For 2 decades, those pictures had been all I had left. Now they felt like breadcrumbs leading me somewhere I couldn't yet see. I didn't even realize someone had walked up beside me until I heard a soft voice say, "You looking for Robert?" I turned. It was a middle-aged woman wearing scrubs, her name badge reading Megan Fuller, RN. "I work at the VA clinic," she said. Miss Lorraine called. "Said you were asking about him." "Yes," I said quickly. "Do you know where he went?" She hesitated. "I can't give you addresses, but I can tell you what I remember. He was one of my patients for years. Quiet man, always polite but lost. Like he was searching for himself." Her voice softened. He had nightmares. Woke up screaming sometimes about water fire and a girl named Claire. Said he lost her. Said she wouldn't forgive him. Tears welled up. "That was me," I whispered. "I'm Claire." She nodded gently, eyes shining. "Then you should know he talked about you like you were his compass. He said your voice was the only thing that made sense when everything else was gone." Later, Megan showed me his old patient file. The notes were heartbreaking. Possible amnesia, long-term trauma. Believes he is a former Navy SEAL. Responds strongly to the word Henderson. There was even a small drawing in the corner of one page, a star with 5 uneven points drawn in shaky pen. Beneath it, "For my little star." My throat tightened so hard I could barely speak. When was this drawn? She flipped through the chart. About 6 months ago, right before he stopped coming in regularly. We were worried about him, said he'd started hearing things, phone ringing at night, voices telling him to go home. Voices, she nodded. Sometimes the mind holds on in strange ways. Maybe he was remembering you. That night I stood at the end of the dock where he'd once sat. The moonlight glowed across the water, silver and still. I took my phone out, pressed play on the voicemail again. "Little star, it's me. I just figured out who I am." For a long moment I just stood there, the sound of waves filling the silence that followed his words. Maybe it wasn't revenge I was chasing. Maybe it was redemption for both of us. A soft breeze brushed my hair, and for the briefest second I could have sworn I heard him whisper, "Don't stop asking questions." That was when I made my decision. I would find him not through government files, not through old soldiers, but through every shelter, clinic, and harbor that could hide a man who once commanded oceans. Because he wasn't just a ghost in a phone call, he was my father. And he was calling me home. It was raining when I reached the address. The VA nurse had quietly slipped me a worn-out veterans housing complex, tucked behind a chain-link fence on the edge of the Jacksonville docks. The paint was peeling from the siding, and the flag out front hung limp in the damp air. I sat in my car for nearly 10 minutes staring at the building through the windshield, my hands clenched around the steering wheel. If he was inside, I didn't know what I'd say. If he wasn't, I didn't know where else to go. Finally, I forced myself out of the car. The rain was steady but gentle, the kind that made everything smell like salt and rust. A thin man with a mop was standing by the door. He looked up and nodded. "You looking for someone, Robert?" I said. "Robert Henderson. I was told he might have stayed here." He scratched his chin. Bob Henderson. Sure. Stayed here a couple nights last week. Quiet guy. Left early one morning, didn't say where. Paid up front, though. Nice fella. Did he leave anything? The man shook his head, then frowned as if remembering. Wait, he got a call that night. Middle of the night, maybe 2 or 3 in the morning. Came running out of his room afterward, looked like he'd seen a ghost. Never came back. The world seemed to tilt. Do you remember what night that was? He thought for a moment. 'Bout a week ago, Tuesday. That was the same night my phone had rung. I wandered down toward the harbor, rain dripping from my coat, the sky a dull gray. The water lapped quietly against the pylons. I tried to picture him standing here, older, alone, staring out at the sea. He'd always said the ocean felt like home. You can lose your way anywhere else, little star, he'd told me once, but the sea remembers you. I took out my phone and called Cole. He was here, I said. Someone saw him. Where is he now? I don't know. You sound like you haven't slept in days. I haven't, I admitted. Cole, what if he doesn't remember me? What if he's not him anymore? Cole was quiet for a long time. Then you remind him who he was, he said finally. And if that fails you, forgive him anyway. The next morning I drove to East Bay Shelter, the last place listed in his VA records. It was a narrow 2-story building squeezed between a mechanic shop and a boarded-up cafe. Inside, a few men sat at a long table eating oatmeal from plastic bowls. The air smelled like disinfectant and wet clothes. A staff volunteer, young maybe 20, approached me. Can I help you, ma'am? I'm looking for someone, I said. He might go by Bob Henderson, Navy veteran. He pointed toward a room at the far end. You might want to ask Sister Margaret. She runs the place. Sister Margaret was sitting behind a small desk sorting paperwork. She looked up with a smile when I introduced myself. Oh yes, Mr. Henderson. He's been in and out for years. Good man, kind eyes. He left about a week ago after receiving a phone call. I swallowed hard. Did he say where he was going? Only that he finally remembered something important. Said he was heading north to find his daughter. My chest tightened. That's me. She blinked, then slowly smiled. Then, I think your prayers are being answered, dear. She opened a drawer, rummaged around, and handed me a folded sheet of paper. He left this behind, said if anyone came looking, I was to give it to them. My hands shook as I unfolded the paper. The handwriting was rough but familiar, my father's blocky print. Claire. If you ever see this, it means I finally remembered who I am. I don't know what happened all those years ago. I just know I need to see you. If I don't make it, please know I never stopped loving you. You were my little star, and you always will be. Dad. The ink had bled where a raindrop or a tear had hit it. I pressed the paper against my chest, breathing hard. Do you know where he went? I asked again. She shook her head softly. He mentioned a place called St. Augustine. Said there was something he needed to see there, something from before. The drive to St. Augustine was 2 hours, but it felt like 10. The rain eased to a mist as I crossed the bridge into the old town. I'd been there once with him as a child during one of his rare shore leaves. We'd watched the sun set over the fort and eaten fried shrimp from paper baskets. He'd bought me a tiny brass compass from a gift shop and said, "So you can always find your way home." I still had that compass in my glove box. I parked near the old marina and walked along the docks. My heart pounded with every step. Then about 20 yards ahead I saw him. He was sitting on a bench facing the water-gray hair tucked under a navy cap, shoulders hunched. Even from behind I knew that posture. My breath caught in my throat. Dad. He turned slowly. The face that looked back at me wasn't the one I remembered, older, thinner, lined by years of weather and pain. But the eyes. They were his eyes. For a long moment neither of us moved. Then he whispered, "Little star." My knees nearly gave out. I stumbled forward, tears blurring my vision. "It's me," I said, my voice breaking. "It's really me." He stood uncertain, trembling. "I didn't think you'd believe me," he said, voice hoarse. "I thought I'd lost you forever." I reached for him but stopped inches away, afraid that touching him might make him vanish like a dream. Then I saw the scar on his left forearm, the one he'd gotten when I was 10, fixing the fence in our backyard.
That was the proof.
I threw my arms around him and sobbed. For a second he froze, then his arms came around me, strong but shaking. "I'm sorry," he whispered over and over. "I didn't mean to leave you. I didn't mean to forget." I pulled back just enough to look into his face. "You called me," I said. "That night. You said you remembered who you were." He nodded weakly. "It just came back all at once, like a wave hitting me. My name, your name, everything. I thought I was losing my mind. I had to hear your voice again." I took his hand. "You found me." He smiled faintly. "No, sweetheart, you found me." We sat on that bench for hours, the rain finally lifting, gulls circling overhead. He told me pieces of what he could recall, flashes of the explosion, the fire, the cold. Waking up in a hospital without a name. Years wandering from place to place, chasing a memory he couldn't grasp. When he stopped talking, we just sat quietly watching the waves. It felt like time had folded in on itself, like the 20 years between us had shrunk to nothing. For the first time in 2 decades, I wasn't chasing a ghost. I was holding my father's hand. For the next 2 days, Dad and I stayed in a small bed and breakfast near the water. The owner, an older widow named Mrs. Keene, never asked questions, just handed us the key with a smile that said she'd seen every kind of story pass through her front porch. He slept a lot that first night, more deeply than I think he had in years. I sat up in the chair by the window watching him. The lamplight made his face look both older and younger at the same time, older from the years he'd lost, younger from the peace that had finally started to settle in. When he woke up, the first thing he said was, "Do you still make blueberry pancakes?" I laughed through tears. "You remember that, just flashes," he admitted. "But I remember your mother's kitchen, and the smell of Sunday mornings." That morning I called Colonel Reeves. When he answered, I barely let him speak. "He's alive, Colonel. I found him." The line went silent. Then he said softly, "Then you need to get proof. DNA test, official chain of confirmation. Otherwise the Navy won't acknowledge it." "I don't care about the Navy," I said. "I just want the truth." "Claire," he replied, his tone tightening. "The truth is the Navy. If he was written off, someone made that happen, and someone's going to want it to stay that way." His words chilled me. I called Dr. Eleanor Price, a retired Navy medical examiner Reeves recommended. Her clinic sat on the edge of town, a low white building that looked out toward the marsh. When we arrived, Dr. Price greeted us at the door herself, a small woman with silver hair pulled back in a bun, eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. "So this is Commander Henderson," she said, extending a hand. "You've caused quite a stir, sir." Dad gave a shy smile. "Didn't mean to." "Let's find out just how alive you really are," she said, half joking. She drew DNA swabs from both of us, sealed the samples, and promised results in 48 hours. Then she sat down with us in her office, flipping through the few documents I'd brought. "Claire," she said, "your father's medical record from 2005 lists him as deceased. But look here, no autopsy, no full body report. Only a visual identification by next of kin." "That was you." "Yes," I whispered. "They showed me the body, burned or disfigured." I nodded. "Then you may have identified the wrong man." Dad rubbed his temples, eyes distant. "I remember fire, then cold, then nothing, just dark water." Dr. Price leaned forward. "That matches a hypothermic trauma pattern. It's possible you were thrown clear of the explosion, survived, but lost consciousness. The rest, the missing years, could be severe amnesia, maybe exploitation." I looked up sharply. "Exploitation," she sighed. "There have been cases. Private contractors recovering survivors and using them off the books. Cheap labor, covert testing, no paper trail. They erase identities. You live under assumed names, maybe even drugged for compliance." Dad's hands trembled. That would explain the headaches and the flashes. I reached across the table and took his hand. "You didn't forget us, Dad. Someone made you forget." 2 days later, the DNA results came back. I met Dr. Price outside the clinic. The sea wind smelled of rain. She handed me the folder. "Conclusive match," she said. 99.9% probability of immediate family. It's him." When I told him, he didn't say anything at first. He just exhaled long and shaky. Then he laughed, quiet, disbelieving. "So it's real," he murmured. I didn't dream you up." "No," I said, voice trembling. "You came home." That evening I called Cole again. "DNA confirmed," I said. He let out a low whistle. "Then you've got something big on your hands. If those contractors buried Iron Wave, someone's liable for 20 years of silence. I don't want money or lawsuits." "Maybe not," he said, "but the truth has a way of biting people who hide it." "You sure you're ready for that?" I didn't answer. I just looked across the table at Dad, who was sitting in the corner studying his reflection in the window like he didn't quite believe the man looking back. That night he told me what he could remember, voice low and halting. "I woke up in a metal room," he said. "Smelled like oil and salt. There were men around me, not Navy, civilian clothes, but military haircuts. One of them said, 'Don't try to talk. You're lucky to be alive.' They called me Captain Rains." I tried to tell them my name wasn't Rains, but they said I was confused, that I'd hit my head. They gave me pills. Every time I questioned them, they gave me more. He rubbed the side of his head, eyes dark. "Sometimes I worked lifting crates cleaning. Other times I just remember walls, steel doors, a window that looked out to sea. Years blurred. Then one day I was on a dock alone. A nurse found me, said I'd been beaten. After that, nothing made sense. Just shelters, clinics, hospitals." I listened, my stomach twisting. "You were stolen," I said quietly. He shook his head. "I was lost. There's a difference." We sent Dr. Price's findings and the DNA results to Reeves. He called 2 days later, voice grave. "Claire, your father's name appears in 2 closed investigations, one federal, one corporate. That contractor, it's still operating under a new name. They made millions off those classified ops. If he talks, they'll come knocking." I felt a spark of anger flare in my chest, then let them knock. He chuckled softly. "You sound just like him." That night, Dad and I sat by the water again. The sunset bled orange across the horizon, reflecting off the calm waves. He looked tired but peaceful. "Do you hate them?" I asked. "The people who took you, who hid you?" He thought for a moment. "For a long time I was too lost to hate anyone. Now, I think hate's just another way of staying trapped. What I want is the truth, so they can't do it to anyone else." I reached over and squeezed his hand. "Then we'll make them tell it." He looked at me with those same gray-blue eyes I'd missed for half my life and said softly, "I'm proud of you, little star." For the first time since 2005, the word proud didn't feel like something I'd have to earn. It felt like coming home. The story broke faster than either of us expected. 2 weeks after the DNA confirmation, Reeves sent the report to a trusted journalist at The Atlantic. The headline the next morning read, "Navy SEAL declared dead in 2005, found alive hidden by private defense contractor." By noon, my phone was vibrating non-stop calls from reporters, veterans groups, even old family friends I hadn't heard from in decades. I tried to shield Dad from the chaos, but he heard the news anyway. When he saw the article on my laptop, he didn't speak for a long time. Finally, he said, "They'll come for me now." Who, I asked. "The people who built the lie." 2 men in dark suits showed up at our rented cottage that evening. They claimed to be from Defense Records Compliance. No names, no badges. I stood on the porch blocking the doorway. "We need to speak with Commander Henderson," one said calmly. "Not without a warrant," I replied. They exchanged a look, a mix of irritation and amusement, before one handed me a card. "We'll be in touch." When I shut the door, my hands were shaking. Dad was sitting at the table, staring at his folded hands. "They're not here to help," I said. "I know," he murmured. "They just want to make sure I stay quiet." Reeves called that night. "Claire, you and your father need to get somewhere safe. Don't stay in the open." "What are they afraid of?" I demanded. "The truth. Iron Wave was never meant to exist. There were chemical tests, off-the-books operations, and money flowing into accounts that Congress never approved. Your father wasn't supposed to survive because surviving meant remembering." I looked over at Dad, who was staring at the compass I'd kept all these years. "He remembers enough," I said. "Then get him to DC, Reeves said. "There's a hearing next week. I'll get your names on the list." The drive north felt endless. Every few hours I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting a black SUV to appear. Dad barely spoke, though. Sometimes I'd catch him looking out the window with that quiet determination I'd only ever seen before missions. I used to think revenge was justice, he said finally. But justice has to mean more than payback. It has to mean truth. I nodded. Then let's tell it. The federal building in D.C. was colder than I remembered: marble floors, polished silence, and the faint echo of footsteps. Reeves met us at the entrance, gray-haired and limping slightly. When he saw Dad, he froze, then smiled like a soldier greeting a fallen comrade. "I'll be damned," he whispered. "You really did come back." They clasped hands, two men who had buried too many ghosts. The hearing itself was closed door. Only a handful of senators, Reeves and a lawyer from the Defense Oversight Committee, were present. Dad sat straight-backed, wearing the old Navy blazer I'd pressed that morning. I sat behind him, every muscle tight. When the first question came, "Commander Henderson, where have you been for the past 20 years?" the room went silent. He took a deep breath and began to speak. He told them everything: the explosion, the rescue, the false name, the years of captivity and labor. He described waking in strange facilities, performing menial work for companies he didn't understand, guarded by men who called him Captain Rains. He talked about losing his name, his memory, and eventually his will to question. By the time he finished, even the lawyer's pen had stopped moving. After the testimony, one of the senators leaned forward. "Commander, what do you want us to do?" Dad paused. "I don't want vengeance," he said quietly. "I want accountability. For the men who were lost, for the families who never got the truth, and for every soldier who came home in body but not in mind." His voice broke slightly, "And I want my daughter to stop living with ghosts." I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. That night back at the hotel, he seemed lighter, like a man who had finally laid down a weight he'd carried too long. We sat on the balcony watching the lights of the city blink against the river. "I thought I'd never see you again," I said softly. He smiled. "You did what I asked, didn't you? You kept asking questions." "Even when it hurt," I said. He nodded. "That's what courage looks like. Not the kind they teach in training, but the kind that lives quietly in daughters who won't stop searching." He looked at the stars, the same ones we used to name when I was a child. "You know," he said, "for 20 years I thought the sky had forgotten me. Turns out it was just waiting for me to remember." I took his hand and squeezed it. "You came home, Dad. That's all that matters." He smiled faintly. "No, sweetheart, you brought me home." 2 weeks later, the hearings led to an official investigation. The contractors were subpoenaed, records unsealed. The Navy issued a statement acknowledging the extraordinary case of Commander Robert Henderson, though they never said the word cover-up. It didn't matter. The truth was finally out. Dad declined interviews. Instead, he bought a small boat, nothing fancy, just enough to take out on calm mornings. Sometimes he let veterans from the local clinic come with him, men who were also learning to live again. He'd stand at the helm, face to the wind, and say, "The sea remembers." As for me, I started writing. Not a memoir, not exactly. Just the story of a man who died once and lived twice, and of a daughter who refused to stop listening when the phone rang in the dark. Because sometimes the dead aren't asking for vengeance. They're asking to be seen. They're asking to come home. The morning the investigation closed, I woke to the sound of waves. Dad was already on the porch, staring out toward the water with a mug of coffee in his hands. The light caught his face, older, scarred, but peaceful. For the first time in 20 years, he looked like himself. "They cleared your name," I said, stepping beside him. "The report's public now. Full acknowledgement, no redactions." He smiled faintly. "About time." Then after a long pause he added, "But it won't bring back the men who didn't make it." I didn't have an answer for that. Some truths don't heal, they just stop festering. Later that week we went back to Maine. The house had sat empty since Mom passed, but I kept it clean like she might walk in any day. The first thing he did when he stepped through the door was touch the picture frame on the mantel, the one of all three of us at the harbor, taken in 1998. "She'd be furious I let my hair go gray," he said softly. "She'd just be glad you came home," I replied. He smiled at that, eyes glistening, maybe. The weeks that followed were slow, ordinary, and beautiful. We fixed the squeaky porch steps together. He learned to cook again badly. Every Sunday he insisted on making blueberry pancakes, even though half of them burned. Sometimes he'd sit outside at dusk, staring at the stars, tracing the constellations with his finger. I'd join him and he'd say, "You see that one that's Cassiopeia? My favorite." "It's mine too, I'd say, because it's the little star." He'd laugh quietly, the sound like an old song I'd almost forgotten. The following spring, a letter arrived, official Navy stationery. It was from the Secretary of Defense offering a reinstatement ceremony and a Medal of Honor for unwavering service and endurance beyond the line of duty. He read it, folded it neatly, and set it aside. "I don't need a medal," he said. "I already got mine." He nodded toward me. That was the first time I cried that month. But the nightmares didn't stop overnight. Some nights I'd wake to find him sitting on the edge of the bed, breathing hard, drenched in sweat. I'd sit beside him, waiting until the tremors eased. "I keep hearing the explosion," he'd say, "the water rushing in. I keep wondering why I lived when they didn't." "Because you had more to do," I'd whisper. "Because you had to come back." He'd nod, though I could see in his eyes he wasn't sure he deserved it. Survivors never do. When summer came, we held a small memorial at the harbor, not for him but for his team. Reeves flew up from Virginia, and even Cole made the trip, limping up the pier with a grin. They stood shoulder to shoulder, veterans saluting ghosts. Dad threw a single white rose into the water. "For the ones who didn't come home," he said. Then he turned to me and added, "And for the ones who waited." The tide carried the rose out to sea until it vanished under the glittering sunlight. After everyone left, we stayed behind, sitting on the dock long after sunset. The air was cool, the sky scattered with stars. He reached into his pocket and handed me the old brass compass he'd bought me in St. Augustine all those years ago. The metal was tarnished, the needle still trembling slightly. "Still works?" I asked. He smiled. "Always did. You just needed to open it." We sat in silence for a while, listening to the waves lap against the pylons. Then he said something I'll never forget. "You know, I used to think dying was the hardest thing that could happen to a man. Turns out it's coming back that really tests you. But sometimes coming back isn't about you, it's about giving the people you love one more chance to heal." I looked at him, my father, my ghost, my miracle, and I finally understood. This story was never about revenge. It was about forgiveness, about finding peace in the ruins of what once was, about remembering that love, even after decades of silence, can still find its way home. Now every morning he walks down to the dock with his coffee, salutes the horizon, and whispers something to the sea. I never ask what. I think it's between him and the waves. And at night, when the phone rings, just the old landline that never stops buzzing with wrong numbers and telemarketers, I still get that flutter in my chest. Because once a voice came through the static and said, "Little star, it's me." And that changed everything. If you've ever lost someone and thought you'd never get the chance to say what you needed to, don't wait. Call them, write that letter, say the words. Because sometimes the miracle isn't in who comes back. It's in who never stopped believing they could. Thank you for listening. If this story touched your heart, share it so someone else might find hope where they least expect it.